So we have a D110 here. Basically what's going on is when you run this, as it warms up, you get a lot of blue smoke. And the hotter it gets, when it, once it finally fully warms up, you get a large amount of smoke, especially when you throttle down and then you throttle back up, you see a huge poof of smoke coming out. So it's usually one of two things that can happen. Usually it can be a head gasket. It's the most common failure, and or the least common we usually see is piston and rings. But overall, generally with these engines being the single overhead valve engines, these Briggs Strattons, they're notorious for head gaskets and or cam issues. So I'm not going to start it up to show the billowing smoke, but I'm going to show some ways to confirm that there's that blown head gasket, and also we're going to fix it, and then we're going to, in the end, show that everything's working. So first thing we got to do is I'm going to remove this hood. All I'm doing is just disconnecting the electrical. Let's see on this one. Oh, this one. I think this one you gotta push and then, there we go. Sometimes they can be a little bit of a pain. So we'll set this just aside. So to find, to basically test and get an idea if you have a possible head gasket and or piston bore ring issues, we're going to do a leak down test. To make this a little easier, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the valve cover off. I'm going to show engine set at top dead center, and then we're going to do a leak down test, and I'll show you how I do this. Because the engine is full of oil at its proper level and stuff, what I like to do is get a floor jack. Let me grab that real quick. And I like to lift up the front end just a little bit. And I usually jack it up on this front mount for the deck. And I usually lift there. Don't lift on the exhaust or anything like that. And then what I do is we're going to go ahead and pull the spark plug. We are going to have to pull this engine cover. But for the leak down test, and you can see on this plug is pretty wet and dark. You definitely is burning oil. Okay, and now we're going to go ahead and pull this valve cover. Break them loose. Then I'm going to grab my little Ugga Dugga. But what I'm going to do too is put some paper towel down just to kind of soak up a little bit of oil that may seep out. And these are all 3/8. And then to get the valve cover off, what I always recommend doing, always start from the top. I get a flathead screwdriver. Don't dig it into the head and don't dig it into the valve cover. Just go in between and use it like a wedge. Always do it from the top, because if you deform this at all, at least it's at the top, usually oil will settle down here, and so you'll have a higher chance of leakage if you don't correct things or if you tweak things. So we're going to go ahead and wedge it open. Okay. So the reason why I tip it back a little bit with the floor jack is that way I have the oil all going back into the pan. So in this cavity here, you can have oil that will sit up this way, and I just want to keep it into the engine, into the crankcase, not coming out. Sometimes if you have it leaning down a little bit or level, you can have a large amount of oil start to come out. So I try to reduce that. All right, so now that we have valve cover exposed, we're going to go ahead and set this engine to top dead center. I'm taking a long, skinny flathead screwdriver. I'm just feeling for the top of the engine. I'm slowly turning it over. Rocker arms and valves. How it works is generally, this is your exhaust. And so your valve for the exhaust is right here. And over here is your intake. And so the intake is this. This one right here. I just had to look at that. Yep, okay, so we're gonna set the engine to top dead center. So that's exhaust, that one's intake, and then I feel in for the piston just coming up to the top. And it's right there. So now what we're gonna do is I'm gonna grab my leak down tester or kit. Just make sure you have this closed off all the way before you apply any air to it, because you don't want to mess up any of these gauges. And then this is the line. We're going to go ahead and hook up to our spark plug hole. And then you just rotate that in there. And then you'll hit the little O-ring, and then it'll stop. There we go, like so. And we'll go ahead and hook it up to this side. And then I'm gonna set this right here real quick, grab my air. And then we hook up our air. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pop the cap here, or dipstick. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna start to apply air in here. I'm gonna hold this to keep the engine from rotating, because sometimes you get enough pressure in there, the engine's gonna wanna start to rotate. So I'm gonna try to hold on to it. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna listen for the sound of air. More than likely, I'm gonna hear it come from the crankcase. I shouldn't hear anything from the exhaust, and I shouldn't hear anything from the intake. If I do, that means one of these valves are not seating, either exhaust or intake. So what we did here is with the engine top dead center, the valves are closed for both exhaust and intake, and our piston's at the top dead center. So everything should be completely sealed. What we're gonna do is go through the spark plug hole, and we're gonna fill that cavity with compressed air. Now, we gotta try to keep the engine from spinning, and so I'm just gonna try to hold on to it and then slowly increase the air pressure, and I'm gonna listen. I don't care about the gauge pressures or anything like that. It doesn't, you don't even need to worry about any of that. So let's go ahead and start increasing our pressure, and we're gonna listen. Where is that coming from? I think it's this cavity. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead, I'll increase it. So now the engine wants to turn over. And another way you can tell if, see how I can rock these and stuff because we're at top dead center. Gotta keep it there though. And they're not closed. So what's going on is as I apply air, what's interesting is I'm not hearing it up here, but but I'm definitely hearing it over here. So between the combustion chamber and then the push rod cavity. When we pull this off, I'll show a little bit better, but that's what's going on. So we've already confirmed that we already have a break in between. So head gasket is bad. This, unfortunately, is a very common issue. So we're gonna go ahead and disconnect this, make sure this is dialed back all the way. I'm gonna put this back in this kit, or in this case. So that right there, I know 100% this is a head gasket without seeing it. All right, so we are going to go ahead and start taking this apart. So what we gotta do is now we gotta take this engine cover off. So let's go ahead and start pulling some of these parts off. Pull this air filter, set it over there. And then we got a couple these. Yeah, these I actually have to pull out all the way. And there's usually 2 bolts back here. So do take note, usually collars are a little bit different. The longer ones go in the back, the shorter ones go in the front. So keep note of that. Let's see if I can get this over here. Now you don't always have to pull this off 100%. Sometimes you can just tip it up and give more room. But the problem is we also have to take apart this, or take this intake tube off of the head. I have to get a 1/4-inch wrench to grab the little screw out of there. I'm also going to grab my flashlight to make this a little easier to see. So it's usually a 1/4-inch screw right over here. I'm gonna set my part there. That way this can just kind of tuck up. The only reason why I'm not gonna pull it off is because they have, what do they call them? This is your fuel pump, and they don't have a screw-like attachment, and so taking these off are kind of a pain, and it's not necessary. So I'm just going to kind of lift it up and kind of tuck it out of the way a little bit. All right. So then I am going to go ahead and pull these 2 bolts. So these go right into the head for the intake, because you have your carb there, and then your intake tube. And then we can just kind of tuck that off to the side a little bit. I'm going to set these 2 bolts down here. I already kind of know where those go. And then we have, excuse me, I've been getting over a cold for the last 2 months now. All right, so I need to grab a couple Allens to pull this down tube for the exhaust off. Usually all of this stuff is SAE with Briggs. And usually, so this one has like a little ball on it, so you can attack it at different angles. I don't like to do that on those, so usually I leave this little set screw loose so I can pull these in and out, and then I just flip it over and I go with the solid side. That's just how I do it, because I've had those break on the end, especially if they're really on there. That's why I do it this way. And then we can, now that we got it broken loose, there we go. Now we can pull this downpipe out. And then just take care, you know, there's a gasket still on here. The same thing, there's a big O-ring style a gasket on these. So just be careful that you don't mess any of those up. And then we're going to just tuck our spark plug wire out of the way and get a little bit of this oil out of here. Okay, so now what I do is I go ahead and start taking these bolts off. The engine's at top dead center, which makes things a little easier. You'll see what I mean in a little bit further. So we're gonna go ahead and take these bolts off, but I'm gonna grab, which these are all 3/8, but I'm gonna grab a fresh paper towel to lay in front of me to set some of the stuff down as necessary. Okay, so on these, their torque's pretty good, so I need to go ahead and break them loose. So we got the 2 over here, and then we got the 3 here. And then there should be, I think it was 2 or 3 on the bottom, 3 on the bottom. There we go. And these should be all the same length. So what I usually do, just in case, depending on if it's not a common engine that I, work on, I'll set them down and put them together, kind of like this, just to compare the lengths as I set them down. If they're all the same, then they can basically go in the same pile. Okay. So now with this last one, I'm just pushing against the head just so it doesn't fall down, and then we're going to just gently pull it back. Now, when doing this, these push rods are going to come out. This is the exhaust one. So this one's up top, and this one, which is your aluminum one, this one's the intake. So now when I pull this out, you'll see what I mean. So basically, here's your push rod cavity. That's where the push rods were through, and this is where we're broken. So it's super obvious on this. Let me grab a flathead screwdriver and then just gently, don't dig, just go right underneath this and just slowly bring it down, using it like a little wedge, just to kind of gently break her loose. Just like that. Now, if I flip it over, you can see, I mean, it broke pretty good. And then right here, completely broken through. So what's happening is, as this piston's going down, it's sucking in oil through this cavity. And then it's burning it. And then you're also blowing combustion gases into this crankcase. And so this oil can change in a heartbeat too, depending on how bad it is. So we're going to go ahead and replace this. Well, before we replace this gasket, we're going to clean everything up, make sure everything is good to mate our new gasket too. So let me grab a few things to do that. Okay, so when I clean these heads, basically, let me grab a little bit of mineral spirits. So usually a little can of mineral spirits, little old toothbrush or whatnot, just kind of clean the out part outside. Just kind of wipe it off. And then once you do that, what I use, sorry, excuse me. What I use, this is what some machinists use. I can't remember what this tool is called, but basically it's a hardened flat edge. And you keep this completely flat, and then you just gently glide over the surface, but you got to keep it flat. And you can get all of this, the little bits that are on there. Doesn't work well if you have large chunks, but for little fine stuff, this works awesome. So this is what I like. This is how I go about using it. And then gently just going around, making sure to keep this flat. And then I'm cleaning this off every so often. And this is actually looking really good. And then just make sure, especially in this area where it blew, there we go. And then wipe this off. There we go, and this looks good. Sometimes I like to run my finger through, just kind of feel things, just make sure this is part of the inside, and then just make sure that everything feels good. And then now we do the same thing on the other. You can clean all that stuff off unless there was like a big, large, a large amount of carbon or whatever build up on there. You normally don't have to mess with that. It's just fine. Okay, and then same gig on here. I try not to, so what I'll do normally on this is I'll grab a little piece of paper towel, kind of fold it and set it just inside like that. The reason why I do that is so in case I drop anything, I can just slide this out and basically essentially squeegee out anything that I did drop in there. Sometimes there's a lot of gasket material. This actually came off pretty cleanly. And then sometimes these shields and stuff, they'll get in your way, and so you're kind of having to dance around things. And then sometimes if you get, pretty big boogers on there, they start making it a little harder to just kind of glide. And you definitely don't want to gouge. That's why I'm just applying light pressure and just working it. Like all that stuff that fell down, I could have got a little bit on there. This thing actually looks pretty good. Okay, so now usually why I like to have the engine still at top dead center so you don't get boogers in there. And because I was did a leak down test, it went down a little bit. So let me set that back up there. There we go. All right, so that actually looks really good. Feel all this. And all I'm doing is feeling for, like, if I feel any bumps or raised things, and I don't feel anything. It actually feels really good. Okay, So now let me go get our head gasket and I will show you what to do that from there. And so on that, I just kind of squeegee out just like that. So let me go grab the head gasket and I'll be right back. So we have our new head gasket. It's part number 796584. And basically, here's our old one. And then here's our new one. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and install it on here. Let's see here. Just like that. And then those studs can kind of hold it there. On these, so what I do before I start installing these bolts, I personally clean these bolts off. You don't want any oil or anything on these threads because that can change your torque setting. So let me grab my air here. So what I do is with my mineral spirits, I just clean each one real quick. I'll set it over here. Okay, so now that those are cleaned up, we're gonna go ahead and take our head, make sure everything is good. I don't have any boogers hanging in there. Okay, so all that looks good. And we're gonna go ahead and reinstall this. I'm just trying to find the alignment pins, making sure that they line up. And then what I'll do is run one in, not all the way, but just enough so there's maybe an 1/8 inch of room. And I'll kind of do the same thing, but I can leave those out a little further, more like a 1/4 inch. Now when I'm putting them in, especially using an impact gun, or even a small one, I'm just making sure that I'm making sure I'm getting threads, I'm not cross-threading or anything. Because once you feel any resistance, you just gotta stop and correct that. And if you have to, definitely do it by hand. Because you eventually will get a feel for it if you're doing, enough with your impact gun. You'll get a feel for it, but you just gotta be careful. That's why I'll never go full blast on those. All right, so now I gotta put my push rods in. So there's several ways you can go about this. You could basically go ahead, since you're gonna have to check for valve lash and all that and adjust for that, which we're gonna do. You can you can just loosen these up and you can tuck them off the side and then you put them in and redo it. I just do it this way. This is how I like to do it. But there's multiple ways you can do it. In the end, it all comes out to the same result. So I usually put a little bit of assembly lube at the very end. This goes all the way back onto the tappet. Then I'm making sure I'm also putting these in the right direction, the way that it came out. I'm not flipping them around. They go to the right spot. This is exhaust. This is intake. So exhaust is close, intake. And how you can tell which direction, if you didn't label it or whatever, or which one goes where. Aluminum always goes with intake, steel goes with exhaust. And then there's usually a little bit of rubbing here from the little retainer. And that's how you can also know which direction. Otherwise, you can label them. I will label them, especially if I have like a twin. I'll definitely label them, set them aside for which one. Okay, so I already wiped this off, and I'm going to put a little assembly lube on here. And I got to make sure that gets on it, tap it. Sometimes these can get a little hard to see. There we go. And I can see it kind of up through here by shining the light in here too. Okay, so now that I got it in there, the reason why I didn't put these all the way down is, one, I'm going to put a little bit of assembly lube on here on both ends. And now I can pull back on this and tuck it in just like so, except for this upper one. I need to actually do this one first. And this one fell down. There we go. Now I'm just pushing back to hold it, and then I'm double checking where they're at. I'm sorry. So that's in, and then that one's in. Okay. So yeah, it's important that you make sure that you get them in the right spot, and then all I'm going to do is just gently touch, just to hold it. Okay, and then I'm gonna just double check again that those are in the right spot. That one's good, and that one's good. All right, so now we gotta torque this. This is important. You gotta torque these, and you gotta torque them in the proper order and proper step, because otherwise you can warp the head, and or you can have head gasket failure too. Basically, the final torque spec should be 220 inch-pounds. And then, so you torque each screw in one step, so it may result in a warped cylinder head. Step torque all screws to approximately 1/3 of final torque value, then to 2/3 final torque value, then finish at final torque value. So as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 at 1/3 of 220 inch-pounds, and then you do 2/3 after you go through, and then 3/3 at the final 220. So 220 inch-pounds divided by 3, so we need to do, we'll just call it 74. So I'm going to set my torque thing to 74 inch-pounds. Make sure it's inch-pounds, not foot-pounds. 74 inch-pounds. I gotta let it stop flashing. Okay, so now we're set at 74 inch-pounds. And then we're gonna start at number 1, which is this one. And I think I turned the thing off. So turn it back on, make sure it's on, and it's at 74 inch-pounds. Okay, so here we go. So when you torque these, keep it straight. Okay, 74, and then number 2. I'm gonna turn my light here. And then number 3 is this bottom left. And then number 4. And then number 5. And then number 6, and I'm referencing my phone, it's just a little easier with the picture on there. And then number 7. And then number 8. Okay, so now we double that, so we need to go up to 148. Okay, so we're set at 148 inch-pounds now for the second run. So number 1 down here, it's the center bottom. And then number 2, middle top. Then number 3, bottom left. Then number 4, top right. Number 5, top left. And then number 6, bottom left. Well, side left, of course. Down here. And then 8 right here. Okay, now we set it to our final 220 for our final stage. So number 1. And then number 2. Then number 3. And I don't jerk it, just smooth action. And number 4. And number 5. And then number 6. And then number 7. And then number 8, which is our last one. There we go. So now that is properly torqued. Okay, so now that we did that, we need to check our valve lash. So the engine's already at top dead center. And just to make sure, I can also show that we already know the piston's all the way up. But just make sure that the valves are moving. These are, or let me just check the valve lash first, just see where they're at. But I can already tell you, normally you got to readjust these. So they are currently so that one's 4 thousandths. So we're at 3. Yeah, so we're at basically 3 and 3 here, which I can already tell you is not the right, not the right lash. So, but I can turn it over. So intake, exhaust, and this is where we're gonna wanna grab our top dead center. I always wipe my tool off if I stick anything in there, because I don't want anything getting into the combustion chamber. Okay, there we go. All right, so valve lash, let me go ahead and give you the actual spec for that. Intake valve lash on these engines is between 3 thousandths and 5 thousandths. So I usually set them at 4. Exhaust valve lash is between 5 thousandths and 7. So I always set them at 6. So we're looking at 4 on the intake and 6 on the exhaust. So to set valve lash, so usually it's a 5/8 and a Torx. Honestly, I couldn't tell you what size of the Torx, but it's usually a Torx. Okay, there we go. I'm gonna go ahead and break this loose. Okay, now take the center screw, back it out a little bit. Just give it a few turns. And then I'm gonna grab my feeler gauge. I'm gonna set it at 4 thousandths because we're gonna do the intake first. So we're at 4 thousandths. And then usually I'll turn it by hand. Let me back it out. And usually I'll turn it by hand, you know, just pretty snug so it's holding it pretty good, because when I go to tighten that center screw, that starts to let up. So I'm gonna go ahead and hold this, keeping it from rotating. And then I'm gonna go ahead and snug the center one. And then I'm gonna check it. So it's fairly tight. So let me snug this up even tighter. There we go. So it's pretty tight. So we're gonna check that it might be fine. It might be at 3 technically, which is still within spec. So let me just see real quick. So here's a 3. Yeah, and 3 works in there just fine. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and set our exhaust at 6, which is center. Let's see, these are getting pretty worn out in terms of my little markers. Yeah, 6, okay. So then you rotate the outer nut, essentially. And then I get it snug, so it's holding this pretty good. And then we'll hold this from moving. Then we'll tighten up the center screw. And let's see where we're at. Yeah, that's like spot on. Okay, so we're gonna rotate the engine a few revolutions just to make sure. We're gonna check valve lash one more time just to make sure everything's good. So just go ahead and rotate it. So intake, exhaust, intake, exhaust. Okay, so this is where I want to check it. Top dead center. Yeah, 6 thousandths. Yeah, that's good. So let's go to 4. This is 4. And it's pretty tight. Let's go to 3. And it's pretty snug. So we're good. We're good. All right, so now let's go ahead and clean up the face of this head here. So like on this, what I'll definitely do, and on there, because you want to definitely do it right. But you don't have to get like every little tiny bit off. So like on this, what I'll do is take a razor and then just gently run it. I'm not gouging into it, I'm just kind of gliding along, cutting all the excess off. There we go. Kind of making a little bit of a mess, but I'll clean all this up a little bit, at least on my ground here. And sometimes just taking the blade out, you can just kind of gently run along the sides. Just get the majority of it off. Doesn't have to be super perfect. You can go crazy, but it's not necessary. Because as long as you get it all clean and you get the bulk off, I've never had an issue. Never had an issue. I can tell you I had issues with their stupid gaskets that they had before they went RTV. I mean, you can still get those gaskets, but the RTV sealant is the best way of doing it. Okay, so then we'll do the same thing up here. Sometimes just taking the razor blade off, and then sometimes I like to just kind of tuck a few things just behind like that when I'm working up high. Okay. And if I see anything that drops down in there, make sure I get it out. Overall, it's not going to hurt it. It's just silicone or RTV sealant. You just don't want to add extra things. That's not necessary. There we go. Basically, it's getting all the boogers. So it's pretty smooth. Okay. So now that we got the majority of it off, I usually take a little bit of mineral spirits on the end of a toothbrush and then just go off the edges, touch them up. Same thing on the valve cover. And then using a rag that's not littered with oil, wipe off the edges. Make sure they're dry. Same thing up here. And that looks good. Okay, so now I'm gonna grab some black RTV sealant, which is their, you can get this over at O'Reilly's or whatnot. Permatex Ultra Black gasket maker for oil resistant. It's 82180 if you want to get the same stuff. This is what I use always. This stuff has been awesome. Never had any issues with it. Okay, now another thing is make sure your fingertips don't have like oil all over it. And then I try not to touch any of that other than with this. And then I don't put anything on there, I just put on here. So on here, I make sure, usually I'm a little bit heavier on the bottom. Just running a little bead. There we go. Now, let me put the cap on this real quick. Okay, so again, making sure my finger's good. I'll run my finger down the edge. And I'm kind of just making sure it's all in there. And then on the lower side, kind of just making sure it's even, especially up sides, because I have a little bit heavier. So I'm always a little bit heavier on the bottom than the top, because the oil's usually sitting at the bottom. Okay, so now wipe that off, and then I'll grab my valve cover screws. Okay, so I'll usually pop one in there, and then go in straight on. And then I'm gonna get that one just snug by hand. And then I'll get this lower One down here. And then these other two. Now, you can, wait whatever time and let it set up and all that stuff. You can do all that. I can tell you, I have personally never had any problems basically doing all of this, getting everything put together and firing it up. Never had a leak, never had any issues. But you can do that. You can basically, technically, you can basically let this set up for a little bit. You just barely get it snug, or not snug all the way, but just touching. You wait like, what is it, like X amount of time, and then you get them all tight. That's technically what they encourage, but you don't have to do that. You really don't. So I'm gonna get it snug, and then just a little turn like that. Get it nice and snug, and a little turn like that. Snug. The reason why I do that is because you don't want to over torque them. You really don't have to go much. And then another thing too is you'll notice I'm usually moving it in because there's less leverage on my wrench. If you're way out here, you got plenty of leverage and you can over torque really easy. So when you're dealing with smaller stuff, usually I'll slide my hand in and work on the inside. And if I really am concerned, I'll grab, a screwdriver handle style and then do it that way, because then you really don't have that torque that you could put on it. All right, so now grab our down tube and our bolts for it. So make sure our lock washers are on there. Okay. So I'm gonna wipe this. There's a little bit of oil on here. And then we still have our gasket there. It all looks good. Put that down into the muffler. And then just taking care, I'm not gouging and banging up that gasket. And then get that started. Do note sometimes, with a little extra on there, you might touch it. So just kind of keep that in mind. Yeah, so unfortunately with these engines, head gasket and cam, usually the cam is the hang-on compression issue. That's just a real common thing with these. If, in terms of the can, when I was talking to our Briggs rep and stuff, basically he says you need to set the valve lash every 200 hours and or every year. And what happens is that when the lash gets way out of lash, or where you have a larger opening, that basically you're slapping against that little decompression lever, and eventually they fatigue and break. So that's what he kind of explained to us. Because I was always kind of curious, like, why do you guys have so many issues with those? And that's generally why, apparently. Okay, so now we're gonna get this reinstalled, and all I'm doing is I'm running my finger on there, making sure there's nothing sticking up or anything. And I'm doing the same thing over here on this O-ring, and all that feels good. So I'm being gentle. I'm gonna get this started. I have to lift it up a little bit. Get a little bit of this. There we go. Okay. And then another thing I always do, I always save the old parts, all old parts, except for oil filters, and oil, of course. Because this way you can show your customers what you have, what failed, so they can see, and you're providing transparency. To me, it's a very important part of my business. Okay, so I'm just making sure there's no weight being pushed down on that. Then I get it slightly snug. And same thing up or down here. And then once I get it there, right like so. And as you notice, I moved up, starting from down low, moved up a little bit, get some leverage on there. I never torque these exactly by the book or whatever. Once you do enough of these, you get a good feel for it. If you're new to doing that, yeah, I'd probably maybe suggest doing it. But overall, the biggest rule of thumb is get it snug and don't go more than a quarter turn. If you go more than a quarter turn, you start to increase that chance of snapping the head of that bolt or the bolt in general. So yeah, definitely take care. This spark plug, I'm gonna go ahead and clean this real quick. I'll be right back before we install this.
What? Is it late? Is it past your bedtime? Huh? Is it past your bedtime? Time to go to night?
So I clean our spark plug, and then we're gonna check gap. And we are 20 thousandths. I always set these at 30, and we are too tight. So how I do it, these little things bend, these are junk. So what I do is I take my pliers and just gently, I mean, it really doesn't, I mean, I'm barely even applying anything on it. And so, yep, we're fine. If I can fit it in there, even if it's tight, as long as I got it in there, it's fine. So we're at 30 thousandths, maybe a smidge less. We're gonna apply a little bit of anti-seize to the threads. Get my spark plug socket. There we go. And then we're gonna go ahead and reinstall. Oh, so before we reinstall our spark plug, what I always like to do is turn the engine over by hand. Just make sure you don't feel anything binding up. If anything starts to, like you feel any kind of resistance, especially with that spark plug out, stop. Something's not right. Recheck in here. Maybe your valve lash is too tight. So yeah, don't force this. You shouldn't have to, just gently turn it and it should be just fine. When I go to install the spark plug, it's going to hit compression. I like to check all that stuff before I install the spark plug, just to make absolutely sure everything is good in here. So we're going to go ahead and reinstall the spark plug. And then that looks good. So we're gonna go ahead and slide that on. And when you slide it on, you should feel like a little clip, and that's where you want it to be. So this usually drops down into this cavity. Make sure, yeah, you don't want them hanging way out here. You don't want them pinched up here. I've seen people do it all weird, all kinds of ways. Don't pinch these. Get them to sit down in the cavity wherever it's necessary to make sure you aren't pinching those, because you can damage these spark plug wires, or eventually it will start to arc off to the side and it grounds out. Then the engine's cutting in and out, creating all kinds of issues. So we're gonna go ahead and get this engine cover reinstalled. I kind of have to lift it up a little bit and kind of tuck this down in here, and then this here, a little air dam / heat shield. Make sure you tuck that in properly. So if you notice here, there's a little there's this little step out right here, so the plastic goes in between. So there's this plastic right under here, and it goes in between, and see now it doesn't pull out. And see, like I said, this is in the opening here. I can stick my finger all the way in there. So make sure you're not pinching that. It's a common thing I see a lot of. Now we can go ahead and reinstall our bolts. So in the front, there are short collars. And one way you can also tell, if you see this plastic depth right here, is very short. So that would be short. Over there, it's much longer, much deeper. So you want the deeper one in the back, the shorter ones in the front. And usually I'll get these all kind of started. As you turn these in, make sure that the collar is not hitting the plastic and hanging up on the plastic. Make sure it's going through there. The purpose of the collar is so that as you tighten up the screw, it stops right here at the collar between the metal. It seats flush against the metal, like that essentially. And that way it doesn't allow you to crush the plastic. Without the collar, you're just going to dig into the plastic, and eventually the plastic gets fatigued, and now you have a hole right through it, and this thing's just flopping around. So that's the purpose of the collar. Okay, so I'm going to grab a 3/8 speed wrench for the back two, and kind of feed these in by hand. Same gig over here. Let's get these tightened down. And then the front two tighten down all the way. Sorry about that. All right. And then I have our screw that goes right over here to hold the intake tube from the air filter to the carburetor up. And now we can go ahead and reinstall our air filter and our air filter cover. Okay, so let's go ahead and take our jack out. I'm going to pull it aside. Move a few of my tools. And since this thing was burning oil, I'm going to just pop this just outside the door because we may get a little bit of oil burnage just from residual, and then it should go away. So I'm gonna go ahead and open this door. We're gonna pop it just out. We're gonna run it. We'll make sure it burns it all off, and then we're gonna go ahead and reinstall the cover. So let me open up the shop door. I'm gonna just go ahead and push it up here real quick. And then right here should be fine. I'm gonna go ahead and test the drive system and test the PTO, and then everything should be good. So far, everything looks good. This thing was billowing out blue smoke. It was just burning it like crazy. So let's go ahead and start this up and I'm going to take it right over here to the lawn real quick to do our final test. All right, so that's how you do the head gasket on these. It's really not that complicated. You just got to take your time, be careful, check valve lash, do all of those things. It's really important, especially that you torque down the head bolts properly, along with the setting of the valve lash. Unfortunately, I have recently seen someone set the valve lash incorrectly and have actually had the valve hit the piston. So make sure that you set the valve lash appropriately. But anyway, I gotta basically, everything works, the issue's resolved. We're gonna go ahead and clean this up, and then I'll invoice this out and on to the next one.